Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of Midlothian Council, a virtual meeting. A copy of the virtual meeting protocol has previously been circulated, and I would again like to draw your attention to the following. Members are aware that when they should mute their microphones and only activate them when invited to speak. Once you finish speaking, please remember once again to mute your microphone. Members who wish to speak should do so by raising the raise hand option and lower your hand once you have spoken. With regard to some of the reports on the agenda, it may be necessary to ask members to vote. Votes will be taken by way of a roll call. The minute will not include the roll call vote unless a member has been successful in moving a roll call vote in terms of standing orders. This meeting is public and is being recorded, and a copy of the recording may be uploaded to the Council's website. Should the meeting last more than 2 hours, it's my intention to break around the 2-hour mark for 15 minutes and, if necessary, repeat this again after another 2 hours. Are there any apologies, Verona?
An apology from Mr. Vic Bourne.
Thank you very much. Order of business, especially on this day, which is the anniversary of the COVID lockdown. We will, at 12 noon, observe a minute's silence along with the rest of the nation, recalling not only those who have sadly died, but those who have suffered through bereavement, suffered through the stress, suffered in mind, body or estate, and also, I think, give many thanks for the staff of our NHS and our own council staff, and for our scientists and everyone who is helping to take our country out of this dreadful situation. We now move on to the business of the Council. Declarations of interest may be raised at any point.
Provost, may I raise a point on the order of business?
You may indeed.
Thanks. Firstly, can I agree with your sentiment that you just expressed there? In terms of the order of business, I just wanted to express surprise that we didn't have a further finance update. Council will be aware that since we set our budget, there was an additional £40 million allocated to local government funding. So I just wondered, if we haven't seen a paper here today to allocate that funding, when might we see a future paper?
Yes, I'm not sure Gary Fairley is able to be with us today. Perhaps the Chief Executive could comment on that. Or Kevin Anderson.
Provost, Gary Fairley has his hand up.
Gary, you are here. I apologise.
Yes, thanks, Provost. I'm able to attend just for this part of the meeting. As Council agreed at the last meeting, any further funds that would come through as part of the local government finance order would be taken back to the cross-party business transformation steering group for consideration. So we would aim to do that. In terms of the uplift that Councillor Parry identified was announced when the finance order was debated at stage 3, the final stage at Parliament. So yeah, proposals in terms of, once we understand how that £40 million will be distributed, then bring a paper back to the business transformation steering group.
Thank you. I take it, Councillor Parry, you're referring to a portion of the Barnett consequentials that have flown through to Scotland that are now able to be allocated.
No, I'm referring to the extra £40 million that was announced by the Scottish Government on the 17th of March, Provost. Thank you.
It has nothing to do with the 9 billion of Barnett consequentials. You don't know. Let's move on.
No, I'm just looking to not get into a debate with you when we've got lots of business to get on with. Thank you.
There being no deputations, we move to the minutes. The minutes of the 23rd of February. Are there any points arising from the minutes? Do I have a proposer for the minutes? Andrew Hardy and Pauline Winchester seconding. Take the minutes as read. We now move, there being no questions to the Council Leader, there being no motions today, we now move to the public reports, an important paper 8.1, Local Housing Strategy 2021 to 26. Kevin Anderson.
Thank you, Provost. Further to agreement at Council in November 2020, the draft local housing strategy was subject to consultation and engagement with our communities and service stakeholders. And this final version, which is appended to the report, has also been subject to peer review by another local authority and also within Scottish Government itself. The local housing strategy is a statutory requirement for submission to Scottish Government on a 5-yearly cycle. However, it also provides us with a housing needs and demands assessment across all tenure types with measurable outcomes, as are detailed in the local housing strategy and summarised in section 3.7 of this current report. The previous 2013 to 17 strategy achieved outcomes in delivery of social rented stock, extra care housing, complex care, improved energy efficiency, and also upgrading our traveller site. Also in homelessness, where we withdrew from bed and breakfast use at the end of 2020. This 21 to 26 strategy includes outcomes for further specialist housing provision, house purchase schemes, fuel poverty and climate change, housing conditions and health, and also placemaking. It also aligns to the subsequent resources bid, which will feature in the Strategic Housing Investment Plan to be submitted to Council later in this year, and also to the anticipated National Housing Strategy to 2040. Provost Council is recommended to approve the local housing strategy for 21 to 26. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I ask Stephen Curran to contribute?
Thanks, Provost. First, I'd just like to thank the team for their extensive community and stakeholder consultation and engagement in the production of this strategy. There's so much detail in this report. We've approved the draft strategy back in November, and I think that was peer reviewed by Angus Council, who identified particular strengths and areas for improvement, and they're incorporated within the document. Our vision for housing in Midlothian is all households in Midlothian will be able to access housing that is affordable and of good quality in sustainable communities. Now, in respect to access and housing, this is clearly going to be a difficult task given the pressures on our housing stock and the very low turnover. But I'm satisfied that we're building council homes as fast as we can, and in fact we're building more council homes in this year than any other year of the council. We're also heavily reinvested in our existing stock. Excuse me, heavily reinvested in our existing stock. An observation on the settlement analysis within the report. I do wonder about the areas with the lowest house prices, because I know in Dander Hall, for example, some ex-council homes are going for in excess of £200,000, and you can add a substantial amount onto that for the new private developments as well. It's also good to see that we are continuing our support for developments of mid-market rent, and the homeowner support for the mortgage to rent and mortgage to shared equity funds, and I know that's been discussed at recent councils previously, as well as supporting the Scottish Government Help to Buy schemes. Also noted that the biggest demand for housing is coming from the age group of 26 to 45 and for 2-bedroom houses. I think the message I get from that is that it's telling us just how difficult that is for young people to access and find access to the housing market, particularly when we read that there's been a 36% increase in house prices over a 10-year period between 2009, which was 165,000, to 2019, which was over 225,000 for the average home. Provost, there's so many points in this report that we could discuss. In private rental sector, zero emissions, heating ahead of 2024, private builds, accessible housing, and preventing homelessness, domestic abuse protection orders, the support for armed forces and key workers. But I'll let others pick up on that, Provost. I realise the report's really extensive. But finally, I think it was important to reference the publication last week, and Kevin referenced it, the Scottish Government Housing to 2040 report. That's going to dominate housing policy and thinking as we go forward. But I'll pause there, Provost. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Curran. And Councillor Johnston.
Thank you very much, Provost. As Councillor Curran says, there's a lot in this document, and it's a hugely important document and therefore a policy document which has huge consequences for our residents, our potential residents. So I'm suggesting we reject these recommendations and we have a seminar on the actual whole paper within the next cycle and bring it back to the next council. There's so many things in it that a lay person might struggle with, and I think all councillors have a duty to fully understand the consequences and possibly any unintended consequences this document may have. After all, the majority of the councillors in this council have only had sight of this paper for just over a week, and I think a week isn't enough time to properly digest the paper. Thank you.
It's fairly unorthodox to want to remove an item as long as this, 150 pages, that have been in our hands for, as you say, a week, and the subject is well developed in the council. But let me hear from other councillors. Councillor Curran, would you like to come back on that?
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, I would have no objection to that, but what I would say is that we did have the draft document since November, I think December, when it was approved that it was sent for peer review. So, I mean, it has been there for some time.
Councillor Johnson, are you wanting to move a motion that we defer the consideration of this document until after a seminar?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Wallace, thank you. I would like Democratic Services to handle a vote on this.
Sorry, Provost, can I just ask one more question?
Really?
As I just asked Kevin, is there any unintended consequences of deferring this cycle?
Clearly would be led by members, Councillor, but if that's the will, then we will notify Scottish Government there'll be a delay in our submission. As you say, you've made the pertinent point that we did have a draft here at November Council, which covered precisely the same points, and there's been minor variation from the peer review, both from Scottish Government and Angus Council. But again, we will be led by councillors, as this is a policy matter.
Are there any further comments on the background to holding a vote on whether to defer this?
Councillor Hardy's got his hand up.
Yes, if his matter is to do with the vote. Councillor Hardy.
It wasn't specifically to do with the vote, Provost, but I mean, as Councillor Curran mentioned, I mean, he seemed to be quite happy if we wanted to defer it for a term so that there could be a seminar. I mean, I certainly wouldn't have any issue with that. I mean, I do acknowledge the points that it has been available in at least draft form since November. But equally, I do appreciate that sometimes a seminar is actually the best forum for councillors to assimilate the information and to ask the questions they need to ask. So, I mean, I certainly think I wouldn't have any problem with us having a seminar. Councillor Curran was happy with that, and Councillor Johnson clearly wants that. I don't see any reason why we couldn't. Councillor Parry.
Thanks, Provost. Just an anticipation of what might happen, and if we do go ahead to a seminar, I think it would be really useful if we had a document that was more accessible to the public. I know we're talking about councillors, but I think lots of the documents that we put out aren't accessible to the public, and I think we should always try and have a version that can be engaging to our communities as well. I don't know if that's something that can be worked on before or as part of any seminar, but I would like to offer that as not as a motion, but just as a suggestion.
Understood. There being no further comments, could I ask the Democratic Services to take a vote on the proposition from Councillor Johnson that the housing paper be deferred to a future council after the holding of a seminar?
Councillor Alexander.
I move with the deferment.
Councillor Cassidy.
With the deferment.
Councillor Curran.
Deferment. I think everyone's in agreement here, Provost.
Yeah.
Is there anyone who does not want a deferment of this important paper on housing? That being the case, I declare the motion carried. The item will be deferred to the next possible council meeting following a seminar on housing. And we move to 8.2 on page 154, the Edinburgh and South East Scotland City Region Transport Appraisal Board bid into the Bus Partnership Fund.
Thank you, Provost. This report seeks Council's approval for a collective regional bid by the South East Scotland authorities to the Transport Scotland Bus Partnership Fund, which amounts to 500 million, which is currently available for bus priority measures on local and trunk roads, infrastructure investment to address climate change and congestion to reduce car usage, whilst there's been declining passenger use during the COVID pandemic. While a regional bid is recommended, it's also possible for Midlothian Council to submit an individual bid, as transport has been an integral theme debated by members in relation to our exceptional growth and its impact on our existing transport infrastructure and service connectivity. A regional bid will address cross-boundary end-to-end travel corridors, however, and the City Deal Joint Committee report is appended to this paper, and our officers are at present determining draft projects and initiatives for inclusion to meet the mid-April deadline for submission. Provost Council was recommended to authorise Midlothian Council's participation in a collective funding bid. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Imrie.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed, Provost. And just to say that I hope the Council can agree this today. Well, it's actually to note the report in essence. But just to say, Provost, that the Scottish Government are putting £500 million up over 5 years, may I hasten to add, and already they're looking for ambitious programmes. Now, I really do hope that the city region are ambitious. And I think the Executive Director alluded to the kind of growth patterns that we see in Midlothian. And it's really, really important that it's not just about doing the widening a road or indeed some of the other things that we can do to help with the bus operators. It's actually about being ambitious. And I think, for example, and I'll throw something like this in, and this is not in any way policy driven, but from the likes of Miller Hill up to Lonehead and through to Easterbush, which is going to be our keystone. What about a guided busway, where we can take people up there? It skirts the south side of Edinburgh, takes us on to Lonehead and then goes right up to Easterbush. What an ambition that would be for a council that's really trying to punch above its weight. And I say that on the basis that, it's all very well getting the cross boundaries sorted to help buses and journey times, etc., etc. But if we really want to make a step change, particularly in our climate change agenda, particularly in the way that we look at emissions, particularly in trying to get people out of cars, which is going to be difficult after a year of asking people not to use public transport, I don't know. And if we can show to the general public out there that we really are trying to make that step change and trying to make that difference, then I think there's an opportunity of winning in a bid. Aberdeen already have put a £200 million bid in, and if that's successful, there's only £300 million left for the rest of Scotland. So, we better get our skates on. This is the region that matters. This is the council that matters. I hope we can note the paper today, but please, 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 and I say this as a plea to officers, please be ambitious. Thanks, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Imrie. Councillor Parry.
Thanks, Provost. Councillor Imrie has stolen many of the points that I wish to make. But just in terms of specifics, I know it's a point I've made before, but I would love for there to be a bid goes forward to expand our park and rides in Midlothian. I think if we could, take park and rides from Sheriff Hall and straight in and run that across the bypass to the other park and rides in the west of the city, we could join up with M8 networks, rail networks, air networks, and the tram network as well. I think that would be a really good way to take a lot of cars off the bypass at one time, and certainly would contribute to our green ambitions, but also our economic ambitions as well. Midlothian's so well placed in terms of the infrastructure that's around us, and it's my opinion that we just haven't managed to tap into that properly. So for all those reasons, I will continue to campaign for that to happen, and it would be great if it could be part of this bid. Just a question, Kevin, on the back of that, the Transport Appraisal Board, what input or can councillors have in terms of these bids going forward, and then how are they signed off?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Parry. Certainly noted the contributions from yourself and Councillor Imrie in terms of the ambition there, and indeed park and ride is part of those considerations by officers at this time. To pick up on your point regarding the TAB, the Transport Appraisal Board is essentially going to be the clearinghouse in respect of this on the back of the City Deal approach. to assess those criteria. And as I say, predominantly it's going to be about those cross-boundary aspects. I understand yourself and Councillor Imrie's point in terms of the Midlothian focus, but this is also in relation to deriving the benefit on a regional basis. So I expect that will be the measure there. That said, the Chief Executive chairs that board and may wish to contribute also in terms of your answer.
A call there for Grace, I think.
Thank you, Provost. Yeah, it was agreed that that would go through the Transport Appraisal Board. You'll be aware that there's been a number of transport-related funding announced both by Scottish Government and by Westminster Government. Councillor Imrie obviously sits on the Joint Committee, so we are represented both on the Joint Committee, and obviously the Transport Appraisal Board is the officer corps that put together these bids, but that is why we also wanted the paper, Councillor Parry, to come to each individual local authority, because we felt it was very, very important to involve our local members, not just putting it through the regional framework. So I hope that helps, and absolutely if there's any ideas you want us to take forward, please feel free to let Derek Oliver, Kevin or myself know, and we can build those in.
Thank you very much. Councillor Milligan.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. I think all the suggestions here are to be welcomed, but I'd also like to take the point of asking, is this fund, can we look for an eligibility here to get better bus services through this fund? If you look, for example, at areas for east to west and across the boundary, for example, your Mayfield Gore Bridge areas serving up to Street and Retail Park, areas for Midlothian going direct to the Gyle. Because if we're really serious about getting people out of cars once some part of normality gets back to each other, then we need a bus service to service the areas that are the biggest draw for the public. And is there any scope whatsoever to look at bus route development money? So is it for a good period of time, 2-3 years like that happened in the past, where you could see a subsidy going in there to improve the bus services and to introduce bus services to areas that have got either none or inadequate bus services?
Kevin, if you could respond to that, and then Councillor Johnston.
Sure, thank you. Yes, is the short answer to Councillor Milligan's point. Certainly we appreciate in terms of the officer corps the lack of provision from east-west across the county. I can't anticipate that would be accepted on a regional basis, but that's where with reference we're able to put in a direct bid from Midlothian itself, and anticipate at best we can maybe link that into integrated transport provision in terms of a hub such as Sheriff Hall, for example, but failing that we can look at an individual bid being submitted from the council itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johnston.
Thank you very much, Provost. How is this all going to tie in with our strategic framework for recovery, etc., when we're going to be trying to keep everything local? Have we got some kind of strategy for joining up our own hubs that we're going to start creating?
Again for Kevin, I think.
Certainly, it's not something that's featured is the direct answer to Councillor Johnson's point, and we will certainly take that away and give that consideration too, because certainly it's a recent announcement, so we've not had the opportunity to look in terms of that local delivery focus that's certainly been working on in terms of a new model of service delivery going forward, and indeed that will be subject to a seminar for members in due course also.
Thank you.
Thank you all for those contributions, and we thus note the paper and move on to 8.3 Midlothian Library Services. Gary Fairley, if you could speak to this.
Councillor Annabelle Cavaroli is the author of the report and will speak to that. Thanks.
Annabelle.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I'd like to present this report requesting that Council approve the removal of library fines and hire charges. Fines are an outdated concept which are a barrier to access and a deterrent to use, and ultimately they punish those in our communities who need their library services most, now more than ever. Over the past year, as libraries have been closed, fines and charges have been abated as services have moved online. As we start to resume our services and reopen our doors, we wish to encourage our communities back. The permanent removal of fines and charges would be a wonderful way to do this and welcome people back into our buildings. It would also tie in perfectly with the opening of our new facility in Dander Hall. Across the country, the removal of fines and charges has shown an increase in memberships, issues and footfall for library services with no negative impact on the return of stock, for example. I hope that Council will approve this paper as it chimes in with the modern, progressive and caring council and library service that we provide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annabelle. I can remember from my youth the absolute horror of having forgotten to return a library book and having to ask my parents for the fine. Councillor Curran.
Thanks, Provost. There's still time to return it, but I suggest you wait until after this meeting to avoid the charge. Yeah, I completely agree with Annabelle's assessment on that, and thank her for her contribution, and move the recommendation.
Thank you. There being NEMCON, I hope our staff do congratulate those who do return books, give them some psychic income for doing that. Councillor Johnston.
Thank you. In 3.3 of the report, it says that annually we try to raise about £7,000 and it's never been met. So how have we made up that budget gap every year, and what are we proposing to do about the budget gap this year?
We haven't made up that budget gap. It has been a loss for the council. In terms of income generation, personally, I don't feel our library services is where we should be focusing on income generation. It's certainly something that, if it is recommended, I can take away and consider at more depth. But I think for the benefits that it would give to our communities, I'm not quite sure where we would want to claw that back from them.
But thanks very much. It's just if it's been a saving or an income generating line in the budget, I just wonder how it's going to be explained, resolved or accounted for. Gary Fairley may be able to help.
Yes, Gary, do we simply absorb this 7,000?
Provost, in the absence of Gary Fairley, just to confirm your point there, which is it would be met and absorbed because it's a nominal sum within that services budget.
Thank you.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Annabelle, for that proposal. I agree with Councillor Curran. I think that I'd second, I don't know if it was a proposal or a recommendation, but I would second his opinion on that. And I'd also like to confess I've got a book from 1977 still outstanding. I'll hand it back once this is over.
I will happily accept that.
Thank you for that confession. Councillor Hardy.
Thank you, Provost. I mean, I would just like to echo the comments of Councillor Curran and Councillor Cassidy. I mean, you know, especially in light of the evidence. I mean, if we're fining people, but actually a different system results in a better return of the books in the first place, then that's the system we should be looking at. And we should also be considering sometimes administering these fines can actually cost more than the income generated from the fine, and that's never something we should be doing. If we want to generate income in libraries, I mean, we've already looked at the idea of post offices in libraries. That's a much better approach than fines, especially on some of the hardest hit members in our community.
Thank you. And Councillor Alexander.
Yes, I would just agree that with the abolition of the fines. And I'm just wondering if we actually advertise the fact that we do e-books and audio books, because I think that's really important just now and in the future for our less able people.
Thank you again. And there are a few hands up, but I'm not sure to whom they belong. Are we all said and done? Councillor Cassidy, thank you very much for that. Can I thank you again, Annabelle, for presenting this paper, and I think we have a unanimous support and indeed enthusiastic support that we change our practice. Thank you. 8.4 on page 161, the East Lothian and Midlothian Public Protection Committee. Alison White.
Yeah, I'll present Alison's on holiday. Okay, good morning, everyone. Council is asked to note the report, the annual Eastern Midlothian Public Protection Report and acknowledge all the work that's been undertaken. So as members can see, it's a very full report, and I don't intend to go into great depth, but just offer the highlights regarding each area. This is the 6th annual report which covers the period of the 1st of April 2019 to March 2020. Therefore, the impact and work undertaken as a result of the pandemic is not addressed in this report, and I think that's worth noting. The report outlines key achievements and areas for improvement for the year ahead, and the Eastern Midlothian Public Protection Committee continues to address the cross-cutting issues incorporating all aspects of the public protection, including adult support and protection, child protection, violence against women and girls, and MAPA, our multi-agency public protection arrangements. We remain committed to working in partnership to improve services and have over the past year implemented improvements identified through inspections, self-evaluation, learning from initial and significant case reviews and service user feedback. The report highlights the core functions of the Eastern Midlothian Public Protection Committee and the subgroups which sit below it, and also highlights the governance arrangements. For adult support and protection for Midlothian shows a 9% decrease in referrals. However, it should be noticed that a new adult support and protection team was formed in April 2019, which now ensures that there's consistency in this area of work, which will be a benefit going forward. Financial harm is the main type of harm being investigated, and the Eastern Midlothian Public Protection Committee endeavour to reduce the risk of financial harm by supporting national campaigns to raise awareness through the partnership approach. The report highlights learning from case reviews, self-evaluation and the training calendar for adult support and protection. Child protection data for the last year, there was a slight increase in the number, which equates to 3%. However, it should be noted that the numbers are very low, so that was 51 names on the register up to 53. Despite the numbers on the register not increasing hugely, the number of IRDs, which is interagency referral discussions, rose by over 37%. Of which 24% were repeat child protection referrals. So just to offer reassurance, there was an audit undertaken in relation to all repeat IRDs to ensure that we were reaching the correct outcome and threshold, and that was supported through the findings of the audit to say that all IRDs were deemed appropriate. Areas of focus for work going forward for that year were looked after and accommodated children who were going missing. So there was a senior oversight group set up to look at the data and identify those at risk of going missing and support staff with training in this area. So that was a significant piece of work. We also began to introduce the national minimum data set, which will obviously be reported on in the next year going forward. There was also learning from initial case reviews and significant case reviews and 7-minute learning sessions for staff. Violence against women and girls, we had 16 days of activism to end violence against women and girls, and that was a huge success across both local authorities and wider partners. And one of the initiatives being the White Ribbon Pledge, which obviously we did partnership roadshows to highlight this campaign across both East and Mid. Work continues to roll out the Safe and Together model, with lots of staff now being trained in this area of work. The Equally Safe Quality Standards and Performance Framework is now in its 3rd year, which can demonstrate the progress being made to implement Equally Safe, and this is Scotland's strategy to prevent and eradicate violence against women and girls. During this reporting year, there were 236 referrals in relation to children and young people and 718 referrals for women of all ages who requested support from Women's Aid across both Mid and East. Of these 718 women, 116 were then referred on to the Domestic Abuse Service, which is for the highest risk survivors of domestic abuse. Men are not included in these stats, but SACRO's Fear-Free Lothian-wide service group supports men and those from the LGBT communities of survivors of domestic abuse, and it should be noted that in 1920 they received less than 10 referrals across the East and Midlothian. The MARAC data shows an increasing trend in referrals across Midlothian, so that's just worth noting. In relation to MAPA, there's lots of information there, but I suppose the highlight is that there's no significant change through 1920 and the numbers remain relatively static, which it has done for many years. So overall, a very positive report with actions highlighted around what we shall be looking at going forward, which in addition needs to take acknowledgement of COVID, the learning and the work that's been undertaken in relation to that. And just to offer reassurance that during the whole entire year of COVID, there has been fortnightly meetings with senior managers across the public protection, both across Mid and East and our partners, to ensure that any trends that are evolving from COVID, that we're on them as soon as possible. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Joanne. I'm obviously conscious this is a backward-looking report into the pre-COVID period, and you touched there briefly on the current situation where the report next year might look very different.
Yeah, I would imagine that it would. Obviously we're looking at trends. We analyse data every fortnight from police in relation to domestic abuse in particular, because obviously, a lot of that is hidden during COVID because home visits aren't on the same, we're not doing them the same as what we normally do. And even when we do them, often the perpetrator is in the house. So that has been a real challenge going forward. However, I think with the best intentions and working collectively together, we're partners, we're managing that as best we can. But yeah, I would imagine that next year's report is going to be very, very different in relation to data, etc., going forward.
And also, I fear that digital crime is also starting to be much more of a threat than it has been. Councillor Parry.
Thanks, Provost. Thanks, Joan, for that report, and can I put on record my thanks to everybody that's involved in this work, particularly the work around violence against women and girls, and all the staff that are working so hard to protect women and girls at the moment. And I guess, just to kind of briefly touch on kind of some of the events over the last few weeks, everybody will be aware of the horrific murder of Sarah Everard. And, I think it's good that people are now talking about men's role in this as well. Men murder women every day. And it's happening during lockdown. I think, there's been a huge profile raised around Sarah Everard, but we have to remember that she was one woman, and women and children continue to be killed and harmed every day. I wanted to pick up one point in the report, if I could, and that was around the measure about the average length of time survivors of sexual violence need to wait from the point of initial assessment to the first long-term support session. The indicator, although I appreciate that as a historic indicator, is 19.5 weeks and 21.75 weeks in 1920. It's my understanding that during COVID that length of time increased even more. And I think we had discussed a couple of months ago around some additional funding for Edinburgh Rape Crisis to see if we could support them to kind of try and get that reduced and get that service moving back along. Can you confirm or give an update as to where that's got to? And do you expect that intervention will now start to reduce those times?
Joan Trinent.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Parrott. Yeah, I mean, the waiting times are a concern. I can't give you the data today, but the Public Protection Committee sits this afternoon, so I'll be able to give you an update and I can email that to you. In relation to funding, we have ongoing discussions in relation to committing funding. As you know, a lot of the funding is done on, a 2-3 year basis, which is really difficult in order to secure staffing. However, I know Veronica, who leads up the violence against women and girls, was looking at doing a funding bid, and we're all part of that. So I know that I've got officers, as has Alison, in relation to Midlothian, looking at how we can secure ongoing funding going forward. So again, I'll give you an update on that. I'll get one at the Public Protection Committee this afternoon, but they are key partners, and Veronica is very clear in her messages that she reports to us all the time. She's on it all the time. So, but it's very difficult just to conjure up funding, despite us all knowing and acknowledging how important an area this is. I'm sure as we start to come out of COVID and we get a realistic overview of what the waiting times are, it will once again become a key focus in relation to where we're going to, put our money in the forthcoming year going forward. So I will get you an update from the committee this afternoon. Okay.
Thank you. And Councillor Milligan.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. I welcome the report, and I keep quite clearly in mind what Joan has just said to us, that next year's report could look completely different. We have seen, as you say, Joan, families locked away, children who would normally be in their school settings that a professional would see every day. And I congratulate the staff for the effort in making sure that the most vulnerable have been still seen every day, and whether that's through a food delivery or whatever, and it's been a professional that's been there to see them, to ensure as best we can. And I'm glad that we're not sitting here facing even worse news today. with the situation. I think it's really important, though, that given what you've just said, John, that if there are any additional resources needed to meet the demand that a report is brought back to Council, whenever these are identified quite quickly, and we're not attempting to deliver this service and protect them as vulnerable in our society on a budget that we set or a finance strategy that we set some 2 or 3 years ago, and it'd be quite important to make sure that we are aiming funding if it's necessary. So we just encourage officers that if there are shortages or there are areas that they don't think that under current budgets, that reports are brought back timelessly so that members can give them consideration.
Thank you. I think we're all of one mind and congratulate your department and Alison on the strength of our response here, because we know that if these cases explode, then for the point of view of councillors, they're a huge drain on our activities, but we've obviously got COVID and many other things that we need to consider. So thank you again for this paper. We now move to 8.5 on page 203, covert surveillance. Kevin.
Thank you, Provost. This report informs members of the regulated process in our prescriptive system for compliance in undertaking covert surveillance by council officers. The Regulation of Inspection Powers Scotland Act 2000, otherwise known as RIPSA, provides the framework for any activities which have been undertaken, such as test purchasing for age restrictions by trading standards, noise monitoring and CCTV footage for antisocial behaviour incidents. This process is subject to external independent inspection by the Office of the Surveillance Commissioner. I would draw members' attention to section 3.4 in relation to the figures, and these are now being amended. They still total 13 over the last 3 years. However, for the year 18-19, there were actually 9 RIPSA authorisations. For 19-20, there were 5 RIPSA authorisations, and in the past year, there remained 0. So this reflects the reducing proportionate use of RIPSA activities, and Provost, this report is for no time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any interrelationship with GDPR, which has made the regulations here more complicated or more risky for the council?
And not to my knowledge. I might ask Alan to speak to that in terms of his knowledge of the read across between the respective regulations.
I'm hoping the answer is that there isn't any.
That is indeed the answer, Provost.
Thank you.
The two run separately. I suppose we have to be aware of the GDPR regulations at all times, that they are embedded in the council's work as business as usual, and they don't add any additional difficulties in themselves to the RIPSA requirements.
Okay, therefore I think the council notes this report. Councillor Curran.
Thanks, Provost. Yeah, just to note that and acknowledge the amended figures there, that there's been 14 instances since 2018. Provost, I'd like to add another recommendation to this report, and I know it's not directly linked, but it's just a request for a report to come back to Council on our CCTV systems with a view to upgrading and modernising their equipment, just to help us improve our safety on our streets, and also to consider redeployable cameras. So just an additional recommendation just to ask for a report on our CCTV systems to come forward to Council. Provost, thanks.
Yes, thank you. I mean, redeployable camera is also something the police, I think, are taking very seriously. Also, this is not part of this report formally, but I wonder if, Kevin, you could respond to that.
Yes, we'll take away that recommendation. That is subject to separate, different legislation and regulation, Provost, as fixed cameras. However, we'll bring back and relate to that in the report to Council.
Thank you. And Councillor Wallace?
Yeah, thanks, Provost. Yeah, I agree with Councillor Curran, and I have already asked that the CCTV system be looked at and upgraded, and so we could be informed, especially now that there seems to be an awful lot of antisocial behaviour in our streets, and it would be great to have this up and running. And before, when I asked for it years ago, an upgrade, I know we had a system where all the monitoring equipment was held in Midlothian House, and people had volunteered to look after the monitors during the night, but Midlothian Council said no, they couldn't give them access to the building at that time. but I believe now they've been moved to the police headquarters in Dalkeith, which would leave the availability of volunteers to monitor these things rather than take up policemen's time, and they could direct police to any problem areas. So I welcome them coming forward with an upgrade of the CCTV system throughout Midlothian.
Thank you for that. It sounds as if we need dialogue with the police as well as examining our own CCTV capabilities. Kevin, are you happy to take that leg in charge as well as the initial suggestion from Stephen Curran?
Yes, certainly, Provost. There are different operating models which are deployed across other local authorities, some of which indeed do involve volunteers, but that's not within police premises to my recollection, but certainly we'll scope that into the report coming forward to Council. I see my colleague Derek Oliver's come in, so there may be some additional element to that answer.
Derek Oliver, hello.
Thank you. Morning, councillors. Yes, happy to provide further briefing on the CCTV network. We've been working across services and with the police to ascertain how the capability and capacity of the current system, and also augment it with the wireless CCTV units, of which we have one at the moment that we target antisocial behaviour at various hotspots tying into the street lighting circuit for the power. We are looking at various options, and that includes other aspects including fly tipping and littering, etc. So bringing it all together, I'm happy to provide a further briefing once we scope it out with the police. Thanks.
Yeah, very pleased that you mentioned fly tipping, where we definitely need more detection power. Councillor Parry.
Thanks, Provost. Just a very brief point, but I'm aware with my COSLA hat on, I chair the Scottish Police Forum, and we've agreed with the Scottish Government and Police Scotland to start a tripartite discussion around CCTV. So I think it would be good to do something locally, but if there's a national conversation there that we're having as well, it would be good to link into that. So I'm happy to have that conversation with Derek offline, if that's helpful.
Yeah, I'm sure this is a Scotland-wide issue, but obviously Midlothian would like to be involved with best practice, so I would commend that comment. Thank you, Councillor Parry. And there being no other hands up, we are 10 to 12. The next paper, 8.6, glyphosate weed killer. Can I ask Kevin Anderson to introduce this paper?
Thank you, Provost. I appreciate this report is likely to be contentious as it requests approval to revert to the use of glyphosate, where it was suspended in 2019 due to concerns on its impact on pollinators. The herbicide use was significantly reduced rather than banned, as it continued to be used against invasive species and in contracted work by our landscape services income generation, which was of significant value to us. Group leaders agreed to my request in May of last year for the use of glyphosate in the pandemic emergency, in order that we could deploy a limited workforce and ensure safety measures in our communities to provide access for exercise space, for our communities to be socially distanced on pathways, and ensure that there were sufficient sight lines for drivers who were on essential journeys. Operationally, as we are now scheduling our open space maintenance for this season's work plan, and still have to operate with COVID-safe controls and measures, I appreciate policy-wise this council is being asked to approve the use of glyphosate. However, that's now on a spot application basis, which is to avoid any blanket approach, and also agree the ongoing reduction in its application while providing the conditions for pollinators and community engagement, which are detailed in section 2 of the report in terms of our reflection on previous use. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hardy.
Thank you, Provost, and thank you, Kevin Anderson, for introducing the report. Obviously, we met recently, a group of 3 councillors from the 3 parties, to look at some of the various options, and this option that is being presented to council today represents the sort of compromise position, the sort of position that was in between, as it were. And while it's unfortunate that some councillors will be disappointed that it doesn't go far enough, other councillors may be disappointed that it perhaps goes further than they would like. And I think it's important to acknowledge that we're looking for a compromise in Midlothian, because clearly there is some very differing opinions on the use of glyphosate across the county, and I think it's important that we try and work together as much as possible and find a compromise where we can have an aspiration in the future to have a zero glyphosate policy, but clearly we're not in a position at the moment where there is the technology and there is the alternative methods to go to a complete zero glyphosate position. So I think it's important that we work within the practicalities that exist at the moment and say, look, the spot use of glyphosate where it is needed, unfortunately, that is something we will still have to do, and we should aspire to a zero glyphosate future in Midlothian, but clearly at the moment that is not possible. So I welcome this report, and I appreciate that we've debated this issue several times at council, and I hope that all councillors will be minded just to accept the report this time and work together to find the technology and to find the alternatives in Midlothian so that we can move to zero glyphosate in the long term, but appreciate that in the short term it's not entirely possible to do that. Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from Councillor Hardy's statement there, I'm a bit perplexed as to how much research we've done into alternative methods for doing away with glyphosate poisons. We've had 2 years almost without glyphosate. In those 2 years, we've had worldwide recognition as a council for being brave enough to take that decision to stop using it on our streets, in our parks, in our cemeteries, in our public areas. I have had hundreds of emails from people congratulating me on bringing this forward. So could I just ask Kevin what we have done in the 2 years, or almost 2 years, to find alternatives?
Back to Kevin and then Councillor Curran.
Yep, certainly. Thank you, Provost. So we've engaged with other neighbouring authorities to look at other varied practice there. We've deployed some of those, such as in terms of our manual labour. That was interrupted clearly during COVID, clearly in terms of the intensity of our workforce requirements that we have there. And also we've deployed essentially wire brushes on our street sweepers and been making use of those, which picks up some of Councillor Cassidy's earlier points about making sure that there wasn't dirt soil around in order to allow these weeds to be growing and sustained there. So we have deployed also alternative methods in terms of different herbicide and say in terms of manual hand weeding as well. My colleague Justin Benton, our landscape manager, is available for any additional detail. But as I say, just to reference that we have looked and deployed alternative methods, but we are restricted in terms of the timescale, the COVID measures and the available workforce in this past year.
Councillor Curran.
Thanks, Provost. I'm not sure if Councillor Cassidy was wanting to come back in there or not, or I'm happy to be if that's the case.
Councillor Cassidy.
Yeah, I was, because I've not been overly impressed by the effort that we've made in the council to find alternatives. I was asked to a viewing of a machine that was being trialled, I think it was about January. Now, we're 18 months down the line and I'm being asked in January. I know we've had the COVID thing, but we've also had periods where we could have been trialling these machines much earlier than this. Our community involvement has increased exponentially, as I'm sure anyone who's on social media will recognise. I speak to all of these groups of people that are in Pennycook, Bonnyrigg, Dalkeith, all over our region, and these people are all vehemently against the use of this chemical. Another point I was going to bring up, maybe Justin can touch on this, one of the main aspects of this reintroduction was a health and safety aspect, trips and slips on pavements. Could I just ask how many complaints or claims the council have had from people tripping, slipping or claiming the council?
Councillor Curran, if you don't mind, I'll go direct to Justin Benton at this point on those detailed questions from Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Provost. So just to say that we have looked at quite a few alternatives to glyphosate. Most of the chemicals, alternative chemicals, were based on vinegar or some other more benign products, but unfortunately they would be much more harmful to bees, and the cost was tenfold, and the effects were very short-lived. And in fact, when we've discussed this with other authorities, they've all reverted to the use of glyphosate that trialed other products. Though they have tried that, we also looked at foaming and hot water treatments. So we've done that ourselves and in conjunction with some other authorities. We have been looking at different sweepers, and we have had different sweepers in when COVID has allowed sort of monthly. We've been looking at different pieces of equipment, and we have found some that we think could work with our grass cutting machinery. So we have developed that. As to the number of claims, I'm not aware of too many claims, but I did have one lady who was very keen in Pennycook last year that I shared her concerns with councillors, and she'd had a small child running to school, tripping over the weeds, and had a bit of a head injury and ended up in hospital. And that's the only, and she didn't claim the council, but so that's the only direct incident that I'm aware of.
Thank you. Councillor Curran.
Thanks. Provost, I'm conscious of time. Do you want me to begin? Or?
We have a minute or two.
I will be longer than a minute or two, but I'll begin and just tell me to pause when need be. Just firstly to point out an inaccuracy in the report. It states that Highland Council have prohibited the use of weed killing products containing glyphosate in June 2019. That in fact is incorrect. Provost, I've done extensive reading on this in the past couple of months since it's been raised. So I suppose the first question I'll pose is, who's to be believed? The Scotland's Public Health Minister has been clear in her position that glyphosate is safe, and that the available scientific evidence did not raise safety concerns that would prevent its continued approval. If the Health Minister's advice is incorrect, and some are suggesting, including our own MSP Colin Beattie, then she's misled Parliament. Either that or Colin Beattie's misleading the public. Despite his apparent outrage, he's not raised a single question in Parliament over the last 10 years, and I don't believe he's actually even raised a case in East Lothian, where he also has constituents. But that's an argument for another day, probably. I think it's fair to say that glyphosate products are somewhat on trial here. It's a hot topic and it should be discussed. And all I kindly ask people to do is look at this objectively, as I have over the last couple of months. But Provost, I have no financial interest or otherwise on this issue. I'm not pro-glyphosate, I'm not anti-glyphosate. I'm just looking at the evidence and drawing a conclusion. I'm here to represent all my constituents and the county, and they'll always be my priority, and I'm always going to make the best decision I can based on what I have researched. I would like to, Colin alluded to it, Councillor Cassidy alluded to it, I'd like to pay a tribute to all the volunteers, in particular Dalkeith Gorilla Gardeners. The voluntary work that they've undertaken is so evident and by so many, and not only that, they're also supporting other groups throughout Midlothian and helping them getting organised. And I also want to pay tribute to Councillor Cassidy on that, because he's heavily involved in that. And to be fair, I think he's only a councillor in Midlothian, or the only elected politician in Midlothian who's really been passionate on this issue, and he's got a track record of that. And while I respect his position, we're probably going to disagree on our conclusions. Provost, glyphosate's about as contentious as it gets at the moment. I've always said I'd be open and transparent on the issue, and to detail that, I've actually detailed all my considerations and conclusion on my website, which is stephencurran.net. There's no any political anything to do with upcoming elections on that, just to be clear. Provost, I'm going to go through my considerations and my conclusion, probably about 5 minutes. Do you want me to pause just now?
I think perhaps if we could come back to this issue, and perhaps Kelly Parry would like quickly to make a comment.
Thanks, Provost. Yeah, it's just a brief comment, and it's just in terms of the actual report. So on page 208 of the report, it says that glyphosate isn't a poison. That's what it says in the paper. However, in March 2015, the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer classified glyphosate as probably carcinogenic to humans. And I don't think that those two statements marry together. So I would like some clarification on that point. There's additional studies that have suggested that the chemical can be harmful to people, animals, and the environment as well. So I don't agree with the the points about continuing to use glyphosate. I think there is evidence out there, and it's been well documented, and I think it's really disappointing that there's no mention of that in the paper. My concern is, you know, when we're looking at where are we going to, say for example, we were going to go for the recommendations and we use this in, you know, tiny hotspots, how do we as councillors know what hotspots, you know, is there going to be a kind of detailed list of everywhere that you sprayed glyphosate? Because this chemical was recently involved in an American lawsuit in which the company had to pay out millions of dollars in compensation, and I just don't feel as a councillor that I can possibly...
Sorry, Provost, I want to join this minute silence.
I agree. Thank you very much. We will revert to Justin, I think, first, and then Stephen Curran. Can I therefore ask you to pay respects to all those who've suffered through the COVID pandemic for 1 minute? Thank you all very much. Can we revert to our discussion? Justin, if you could possibly respond to Councillor Parry's detailed points.
Thank you. I'm not in a position I'm a horticulturist, not a scientist, so I'm not going to answer about the poison, etc. I think that's all open to people's interpretation. I would say with regard to the where will we be spraying and where we won't, we have an obligation under law to record where we spray, so we won't have a exact spot, but we will have record which streets, etc. we sprayed in and which areas we sprayed in, and we have to keep those records for 5 years. They're all paper based at this time, but we will have a record.
Thank you. Can I revert to Councillor?
Can I briefly come back on that? Sorry, Justin, how do I, as a parent who wants to make an informed choice about where my child plays, and I don't want my child to come into contact with glyphosate, how do I find out that information, or any other concerned parent in Midlothian?
That information isn't readily available at this time. You could ask and we could say where we sprayed, but and we would obviously sign where we're working, but that would be the limit of it at this time.
It's to follow up on that. Is there any impediment to us having this information available to the public?
Just our record system is not up to it at the moment. We would need to move to a digital system.
Perhaps it would be uncontroversial for us to agree to appraise how much that would cost. We're moving everything else to digital.
Well, I would welcome that, but yes, yep.
Okay, I'll put that to the blackboard, and could I ask Councillor Curran to resume?
Thanks, Provost. So just on to what I considered, and Councillor Parry references the World Health Organization. But there's actually, so the IARC, the report that Councillor Parry refers to, is one of 4 affiliates to the World Health Organization who's had studies on glyphosate. And 3 of the 4 organisations or programmes agree that glyphosate safety, are saying on record that glyphosate does not present a cancer or human risk, although the IARC do say that from that study that Councillor Parry refers. So my considerations were the affiliates to the WHO, the glyphosate approval dates. I've had representation saying it was December 2022, the glyphosate approval date. That's inaccurate, it's actually 2025. invasive species, road safety, the impact on honeybees, Scotland's Public Health Minister's position, Mary Ujon, Scotland's Transport Minister, Michael Matheson, actually wrote to Michael Matheson regarding Transport Scotland's use of glyphosate. They do utilise glyphosate on our extensive trunk road network, which extends over 2,000 miles. I received a response on the 9th of March. Again, all the sources are referenced are available on my website. An extract from that letter reads, glyphosate is the active component in a number of proprietary herbicides. These are considered very effective, non-selective and systemic herbicides and are used widely throughout the world. The active product has been rigorously and extensively tested over the past decades, both in the laboratory and in the field. The main aim of the process is to protect health of people and biodiversity and to safeguard the environment. The vast majority of scientific evidence presented today has concluded that glyphosate-based products are safe when used as directed. Also looked at our regulatory bodies studies and the APSA report. Again, all the sources that I reference are available there. So, Provost, my conclusion is that notwithstanding the weight of evidence as to the safety of glyphosate when used appropriately, I'm content that the continued but limited use of glyphosate in Midlothian, as detailed in the report recommendations, and with the commitments that we detail at point 2 of the report. This includes working with community groups and volunteers who wish to adopt space. This is also the position of the Scottish Government, as evidenced by the recent statements from the Public Health Minister and the Transport Minister. And I'm also content with Transport Scotland's position and note that they are satisfied with the laboratory and field test to safeguard health and biodiversity. I placed the most significant weight on the Public Health Minister's position. In fact, so much so that had there been any concerns raised by the Public Health Minister whatsoever, that would have been sufficient enough for me to conclude that an immediate prohibition on the use of glyphosate for glyphosate-based weed killers by Midlothian Council be implemented, and also placed considerable weight on the Transport Scotland's position. Another significant factor was both the European Food Safety Authority and European Chemicals Agency for Risk Assessment, both of whom carried out detailed reviews of glyphosate and concluded that the available scientific evidence did not raise safety concerns that would prevent its continued approval. Maintaining weeds on our highways and highway verges in areas that are key to maintaining visibility, such as dangerous junctions, lay-bys and inside the bends, sharp bends, is vital for the safety of all road users. And just to point out again that Transport Scotland do utilise glyphosate on our extensive trunk road network. Giant hogweed cannot reasonably be controlled manually, nor in my opinion should it be controlled manually. It's dangerous, no one should be taking a strimmer to giant hogweed. The risks are too great and we can't let this species thrive. And also, as an employer, it must continue to ensure that our workforce are strictly adhering to the manufacturer's directions and undertaking the appropriate risk assessments when using these products, as they would when using any other chemical compound. It's also worth noting that glyphosate approval has been extended in the UK until 2025, and that's been confirmed by Transport Scotland as well, and that the Scottish Government could adopt an alternative policy if they thought that glyphosate was unsafe, as public health has a devolved responsibility. The position of Scotland's Public Health Minister is clear. If the view, as concluded by some, that glyphosate is unsafe, is to be accepted, then the assertion is that the Public Health Minister has misled Parliament and the public, and I don't believe that to be the case. The main message from the APSA report is to use these products more sparingly and to avoid blanket application. And it's for that reason that I agree with the recommendation 1 in the report, to use glyphosate on a restricted spot application basis in Midlothian streets and pavements. And although the impact on honeybees was one of 800 studies, I didn't discount it, or nor did I consider it to be flawed, as I had no way of ascertaining the credibility of the report either way. And furthermore, I think it's important to add that I would never have been able to ascertain if any of the 800 plus studies are truly independent scientific studies, including the study on honeybees. The IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, are a reputable organisation, and therefore it is a reputable study. And their classification of glyphosate as a probable carcinogenic by its very nature demands serious consideration. However, many other agencies around the world, including 3 other WHO affiliates, and for our own regulatory purposes, the Food Safety Authority and the European Chemicals Risk Assessment, found glyphosate products not to be carcinogenic. They've been found to be safe and not a risk to the general population. So, Provost, on balance, the weight of evidence is outlined, as I've outlined, brings me to the conclusion that glyphosate-based products are safe when used as directed. Provost, research has been difficult. I spent a couple of months on this. I've read countless pages and some reports, and there's literally thousands of pages available for reading on the internet that cover both sides of this debate. Having read many of the pages in the various reports, it's difficult to objectively disagree with the collective conclusion of the WHO affiliates, our own regulatory bodies, Scotland's Public Health Minister and our Transport Minister. But there was one interesting quote I had heard from a Dr. Jeffrey Kabat, an American epidemiologist and cancer researcher, who described the glyphosate discussion as a debate between science and emotion. Not sure if I agree with that statement, but that said, I completely empathise with the emotional side of this debate, and you wouldn't be human if you didn't. Finally, Provost, I'll use the following for a comparison, and just as a way to provoke some thought and to qualify my conclusion on this issue. So in the past week, we've witnessed several countries prohibit the use of the AstraZeneca vaccine due to concerns raised about possible blood clots. Most of these prohibitions have now been rescinded. Our First Minister and Chief Medical Officer have assured us that vaccines safe, a view backed by science and research. We're trusting their advice on the AstraZeneca vaccine, and I'm sure everyone's as keen as I am to roll up my sleeve, AstraZeneca vaccine or otherwise, because we trust the science and advice. And I use that scenario to draw a comparison, because in the same way that we are trusting our Chief Medical Officer's advice on the AstraZeneca vaccine based on science and research, Scotland's Public Health Minister and Transport Minister and our regulatory bodies are also advising us that glyphosate is safe based on science and research. And my question would be, is it reasonable to only trust the science and advice on one of these issues? Provost, I'll move the recommendation just with one addition. Recommendation 2, if I can move invasive species into point A in recommendation 2, and add as point B the following. Dangerous road junctions and areas of highways that are key to maintaining visibility for the safety of all road users, e.g. lay-bys and the inside of bends. Thanks, Provost.
Okay, that's the beginning of a motion to push this through with that amendment. As Democratic Services got a note of that, and are happy that it reads clearly.
Councillor Curran, can you read that out again, please?
Certainly. So on point 1 as it stands, recommendation 2. So where it says invasive species, where that begins, if you can move that to point A within recommendation 2. So 2A, invasive species, e.g. giant hogweed and Japanese knotweed. B, dangerous road junctions and areas of our highways that are key to maintaining visibility for the safety of all road users, e.g. lay-bys and the inside of bends.
Thank you.
I seem to remember, and perhaps Justin can help, we had to have a carve out last time because a lot of our PPP, PFI school contracts specified glyphosate. Could you clarify where we would be on that point?
Yeah, so we have approximately £300,000 worth of contract work. Some of that's the PPE schools, some of it's with Hearts Builders and BAM contracts. So, and they all require the use of glyphosate, and without that, our costs would rapidly increase, and we would probably have to default on the contracts.
Yeah, but that's not covered in the recommendations at the moment. Are you relying on the previous decision of the council last summer?
I am, yes.
Okay. Just to make everything absolutely clear. Fine. There are a number of hands up, and in due course I'll ask for a seconder for Councillor Curran's position. But I'd like to ask Diane Alexander, Councillor Alexander, she's not had a chance to speak yet, and then I'll move up through the hands. Councillor Alexander.
Yes, I would just like to suggest that we're using available evidence. It's not, infinitive evidence, and we're saying that this is non-selective. So how do we know if it's saying that it's a non-selective herbicide? That means that it kills everything. So how do we know what it is killing and what it isn't killing? And why are the recommendations everywhere that we use restrictively? Why does there need to be a restrictive thing on it if it is completely safe to use? And it says that safe to use in recommended, when you use it as recommended. how do we know that all of these things are going to be done? And when we look back to the tobacco, what happened with tobacco, and we were told for generations that it was completely safe to use. And there was government-backed things saying, yes, tobacco is safe, until eventually it was someone that was brave enough to come out with the evidence. And so I am still not convinced that glyphosate is safe to use, and that in future years we'll find out that it wasn't. And I would hate to be in a council that recommended this further down the line when we find out just how poisonous it is.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. You could probably add asbestos and DDT to that list. Justin, do you want to comment on this question of the non-specificity of glyphosate?
Yes, Provost. All I can say is that glyphosate will kill most things that it's applied to. So where you apply it to the foliage, as long as you get a percentage of foliage of a plant, you will kill it. So you can kill anything from a weed seedling to a tree with the application of glyphosate. So it's how you apply it. So it's down to the training. And the other point was we're being encouraged not to blanket spray, as in if you take a pavement, not just spraying the whole surface area, but just maybe those cracks or those edges where the weeds are growing, and that's just to reduce the amount of chemical that will be in the environment. So I hope that helps.
Okay, thank you. Could I ask Andrew Hardy to contribute? Councillor Hardy.
Thank you, Provost. Just to kind of acknowledge some of the comments that have been made. I mean, in particular, I think Councillor Parry's comment was very good about the that how do you know where it's been used? And I mean, I don't know if it's possible for us to add a further point that we should move to publishing online the areas where we are spraying glyphosate, which obviously I appreciate would take some time for us to move to that digital model. But I think that would be certainly a very good way of reassuring our communities that it is being used selectively and not being used as a blanket herbicide, because I think it's very important that we show the community that, you know, we are taking seriously their concerns, because a lot of people are concerned about the use of pesticides, and I think we should be acknowledging those concerns. We should be aiming to reduce our usage, which I think this report does show. And it's worth noting that even when we had a moratorium on glyphosate usage, we had an exception for invasive species such as knotweed and hogweed. So I think it is important that we accept that we're not all going to be happy with this, but we're better to achieve a step towards an outright ban than get ourselves into a situation where we're just going to go back to blanket spraying everywhere with no records being published for the public. So I think we should, you know, if we can all come together and say, look, a lot of the councillors here would like an outright ban. It's not achievable at the moment. We should take that step, though, where we're reducing our usage, we're publishing online where it's being used, so that the community can you know, have that confidence that it is being used in limited ways, and knowing where it is being used. There is also the options within the report for areas to take over their own weed removal, so that they're not relying on chemical use if they wish to. I think this is the best option at the moment for reducing our use on glyphosate, and I think all councillors should support that at this time, because we'd all like not to have to use pesticides. I think, you know, everyone would be quite happy if we didn't have to use pesticides. The reality is that is not possible. There's some species that require pesticides, and even when we had a moratorium, we acknowledged that there was that case. And I think we should be moving to the stage where we're looking at those new technologies, we're looking at those community-backed solutions to help reduce our usage. We're better to have, you know, half your cake than none of your cake. And I do appreciate that some councillors would like us to have an outright ban, but it's clearly not going to happen at the moment. There's not the technology, there's not the alternatives there to do that. And even when we did have a ban, we still acknowledged exceptions. So I would be very happy to second Councillor Curran's moving of the motion if he would be willing to accept my point about we should publish where it has been used on our website, in the same way that we publish our spending, we publish our council minutes. You know, that's something that we should look to do for that transparency for the community, and so that the community can have confidence. And I think we should be reluctant to engage in lengthy scientific discussions at a council meeting when none of us are scientists. You know, and there's no point us having discussions about what constitutes a carcinogen when we're not qualified to do that. I mean, even water taken in sufficient quantities can be classified as a poison. So we have to be very careful about what we're saying at these council meetings. And we should try and work on the available evidence, and we should aspire to that glyphosate-free future, but accept that that is not something that is achievable at the moment, but we should certainly take a step in that direction. And I hope all councillors could be minded to take that step.
Thank you, Councillor Hardy. I mean, the suggestion which came from Kelly Parry, and I think is supported by Justin Fenton, that we look at digitising our records. Logically, if you digitise them, there's no point not making them public. I think I'm happy for that to be on the blackboard, because I think we'd probably need to have a feasibility of study for that at a separate council meeting. And I don't really want to complicate the motion any further, but if you're happy to let it stand on that basis, we have a somewhat slightly amended recommendation, courtesy of Councillor Curran. So I take it you're happy to second that, Councillor Hardy?
Yes, Provost. With as long as we acknowledge that we do look to publish where we're spraying it at eventually, as I appreciate that will take some time.
Councillor Curry, and then the very patient Councillor Cassidy.
Thanks, Prof. Just to say, I mean, in no way do I profess to be qualified in any disciplines or subjects that I'm talking about, or qualified to analyse scientific reports. Provost, and let me be clear as well, in no way am I trying to discredit the passionate views of Councillor Cassidy or any other member of the public who is passionate on this, because I have had representations. Merely what I've done, Provost, is done extensive reading over the last couple of months, and this is the conclusion I've drawn. So I just want to make that clear. Thanks. And actually, just to address one point, I mean, Councillor Alexander says she doesn't want to, she wouldn't, and I completely agree with that. She wouldn't want to be part of a council that takes a decision to say it's safe and it turns out it's not safe. But similarly, I wouldn't want to be part of a country where the public health minister says it's safe and it turns out to be safe. So, you know, we can scale these up. But thanks, Provost.
Thank you again, Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Chair. I think the word here is responsibility that's pertinent. Last year, we had a moratorium and let the council spray in areas. I was at that meeting. I agreed to that as a temporary measure. My trust in the way that that was handled is completely demolished. We went out on a killing mission. We all, every councillor here, had emails from constituents saying how badly that was handled. We sprayed people's gardens, we sprayed places, wildflower areas. It was an absolute disgrace. And Justin coming back and telling us that we have no way of monitoring where we're going to spray now has made me even more resolute in not wanting this poison back in my community. And at this moment, I'd just like to apologise on behalf of our SNP group to the public of Midlothian, because I can see what way the wind is blowing here. We're going to bring this back. I'd like to apologise, and I'd like it put on record for my children and my grandchildren that I tried my best to change the mindset of this council, and it's failed. So good luck, guys, with your glyphosate, because I'm out. I'm proposing we ban it completely.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. I don't understand this is actually a party political matter, but perhaps Justin Fenton, you could comment a little bit more. I understand that we do have records. The trouble is that they're not available to the public. We are obliged statutorily to keep records of where we spray.
That's correct. So we have to record the product used, the dilution rate, and the weather conditions and where we've applied it, and we have that on a sort of triplicate paperwork system, and that's not, you know, that would take time and effort and be a slow process to have available to the public. So we would need to go digital, and actually the Scottish Government is looking for feedback on an annual basis or biannual basis now, so it'd be very useful to move to a digital system.
Thank you for that. Councillor Johnston.
Thank you. I second Councillor Cassidy's alternative recommendation. I've listened really carefully. I'm obviously not a scientist. I'm just somebody's mammy, really. But I'm horrified that Andrew Hardy is saying in the short term we continue to poison the earth, plants, water, animals and people. No, we can stop doing that. And the other thing is, it's not just the spraying that's the bad thing. We don't follow up with appropriate maintenance afterwards to sweep it away. For example, I walked down the beaches the other day there, and the roadside curb has completely disappeared. It's under at least 6 or 7 inches of muck. The muck is also encroached into the road. It chokes the drains. And this is all a result of no following through. So I just think, even if we did go back to spraying, we're not going to maintain the job properly. And so what's the point of doing a half job? Just ban the chemical completely. I've had cancer. I don't know how I got it. I certainly didn't want my children to get cancer. So that's why I second Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you for that forthright support. We clearly have two positions that are starting to develop here. I'd just like to ask on the financial front, it's obviously not about money if it is indeed as serious as is contended. But if we did not adopt this policy and also was faced with claims from the PPE, school and construction industry where we have contractual obligations, I consider it might breach the rules, considering we've just had a budget which left us with minimum reserves. I wonder if Gary Fairley would like to comment as to whether we have a financial problem looking at any different situation. Gary's gone. Has anyone else?
Provost, I am here. Sorry, I've rejoined the meeting. As I understand it, you're asking about the amendment from Councillor Cassidy, which would be to a complete ban on the use of the substance. I think there is a number of factors to that, and we would need to. I would certainly need to consult with the technical experts, Justin, and others in terms of what the alternative maintenance regime would then be for our open spaces and our assets, to be able to advise council properly on the cost of that alternative model. Clearly, there are contractual issues which would need to be considered around PPP contracts that we have entered into to maintain open space to a set standard and a set approach. So we need to consider the financial aspects of that, but also what the financial aspects of an alternative delivery model would be to maintain the highway network, footpath network, etc. So just not in a position to give you an informed view on financial implications at this point.
But at any rate, there's no absolute block on us taking the principal position that's being suggested by Councillors Cassidy and Johnson. That being the case, I think we're getting to the point where we ought to have a vote. The substantive motion is Stephen Curran's motion, which is the amended recommendations that you have, which is seconded by Councillor Hardy. And the contrary motion is a complete ban on the use of glyphosate by Midlothian Council, proposed by Councillor Cassidy and seconded by Councillor Johnson. Can I ask Democratic Services to therefore to take a roll call on the grounds that these are binary motions, and if the first one succeeds, then the second one will be presumed to have failed.
Okay, Councillor Alexander.
I move to ban it.
Councillor Cassidy.
Ban it.
Councillor Curran.
I move my amended recommendation.
Councillor Hackett.
The recommendation.
Councillor Hardy.
The amended recommendation.
Councillor Imrie.
Recommendation as amended.
Councillor Johnston.
To ban.
Councillor Leigh Douglas.
The amended recommendation.
Councillor McCall.
To ban.
Councillor Milligan.
Amended recommendation.
Councillor Muirhead.
Amended recommendation.
Councillor Monroe.
Ban, please.
Councillor Parry.
To ban.
Councillor Russell.
Amended recommendation.
Councillor Smale.
Abstain.
Councillor Wallace.
Ban.
Councillor Winchester.
Recommended amendment.
That's 9 for the amended recommendation, 7 for the amendment, and 1 abstention.
Thank you all for your contribution. I realise that a great deal of work has gone on both sides of this debate, and I thoroughly respect that. We now move on to item 8.7, the ESE Public Sector Transformation Awards. Can I ask Grace Vickers to talk to this good news story?
Thank you, Provost. So the purpose of this report is to inform Council that we have been awarded 2 certificates of excellence to mark our significant innovations in transforming local public services. One of the awards is for our Kindness Midlothian campaign, which was launched by the Community Planning Partnership the week before the first lockdown back in March 2020, and the second award is for our carbon neutral by 2030 work. Section 3 of the report outlines the background, including the 2 categories for which we entered. The Certificate of Excellence for Kindness Midlothian was awarded from the Working Together category. This category awards organisations who have simplified the way that residents and local businesses deal with public services, bringing together multiple contact points, removing the barriers between organisations and moving resources closer to the citizen. The Certificate of Excellence for our carbon neutral by 2030 work was awarded from the Green Council category. This category recognises, rewards and promotes environmental best practice across the public sector in the UK. The organisation making such a submission has shown how they have helped the environment improve sustainability not only in their organisation but their surrounding community. My thanks to everyone who has been involved in this fantastic work from across the Council, our communities and our partners. The report recommends Council to note the achievement by Midlothian Council in being awarded the 2 certificates of excellence.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Emery.
Yeah, thanks very much, Provost, and I'll not take up a lot more time, but just to say, absolutely fantastic to see these 2 awards coming our way. Who would have thought that when we launched the Kindness Midlothian campaign, that we would actually be sitting here today, accepting an award. I mean, fantastic what the achievement is, and we should never underestimate that people coming together can make such a difference. Secondly, on the climate change one, well, what can I say? I mean, I have never seen so many officers of this council really engaging in that particular campaign to try to get us to that 2030 date, which is fast coming our way, even though we don't get out of the house. It's still fast coming our way, and it's just another great achievement, and to be recognised as a council for 2 very, very important but diverse achievements is absolutely fantastic. And my thanks go out to all the staff, the multi-agencies, and in particular the community and public out there that have actually come to our aid, so to speak. And I just think it's great, Provost, to have a good news story when we have so many bad news stories going about. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much. I'm conscious that the media cover our meetings, and there is this alphabet soup in Scottish public life, and I'm sorry to say I don't know exactly what IESE stands for. I wonder, Grace, could you help, at least for the purposes of public record?
Yeah, so Provost, it's a charity that specialises in transformation of local services and particularly sharing best practice. So when organisations are awarded, that best practice is shared across Scotland and the UK, which is really good to learn for councils and other public sector bodies to learn from one another.
Thank you very much. We then move to Equally Safe at Work. It's item 8.8 on page 220, and I think Dawn Farker is able to speak to this. Hello, Dawn.
I am. Hi, thank you, Provost. So I am delighted to be here today to present this report celebrating the Council's outstanding achievement in securing bronze accreditation for Equally Safe at Work. As we heard from Joan Trinent earlier, Equally Safe is Scotland's strategy to prevent and eradicate violence against women and girls. Violence against women and girls in any form has no place in our council and has no place in our society. It damages health and well-being, it limits freedom and potential, and is a violation of the most fundamental human rights. Now, currently, the Equally Safe Employer Accreditation Programme is the only one of its kind in the UK, focusing on and establishing the link between gender equality at work and violence against women. And following lots and lots of hard work over a period of 2 years, on the 9th of March, Midlothian was one of only 4 councils in Scotland that was awarded the bronze accreditation. So an outstanding achievement. And despite Midlothian being one of the smaller Scottish councils, this accreditation fundamentally demonstrates our level of ambition, our level of aspiration to prevent and eradicate women's inequality at work and prevent violence against women at work and in wider society. In section 4.1 of the report, I've provided a small sample of the magnificent progressive work that's been undertaken and implemented, with lots more planned in the future. I'm personally delighted to have been involved in the programme and building and strengthening links across the council and with our many partner agencies. Therefore, I feel it's really important to recognise that this achievement of the accreditation has truly been a collective endeavour. So to conclude, I would draw your attention to the recommendations detailed on page 220 of the agenda pack, and I very much look forward to updating Council on our future journey towards silver accreditation. Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity in celebrating this achievement with you today.
It's a pleasure to hear from you, Dawn. Margot Russell had a hand up first. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Provost. Happy to support the movement of this particular piece of work, and I echo everything that has been said. Involved in this important piece of work. It's indeed great that our council is only one of 4, as it has been mentioned, to receive this bronze accreditation. Big councils and smaller ones like us. Why is this important? Not only to our women employees, but becoming accredited demonstrates this council's commitment to gender equality and preventing violence against women. We also develop an increased capacity for addressing the inequalities experienced by women in the workplace and a better understanding of the role of employers in supporting the women who have experienced gender balance violence. Being accredited demonstrates strong leadership on advancing gender equality, and the council should enjoy increased employment morale, and by becoming a sector leader with the bronze accreditation, we can demonstrate our commitment to preventing violence against women and girls. And the scheme has now written into our council policies, such as the safe leave provision to those who've experienced gender balance violence and who need potential sign-off. I look forward to the ambitious plan of advancing to a silver accreditation in the next 2 years, and happy to, as I say, to move this. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. Councillor Parry.
Thanks, Prof. I'm just going to keep my camera off just now. I don't know if anybody else is having Teams issues, but I just wanted to say a couple of things really. It's really unusual as a councillor to be so involved in the implementation of something. Normally we talk about stuff at a strategic level, and so it was amazing to be part of the team that Dawn was referencing there, and I'd like to give my thanks to Dawn, who was really ambitious and bold from the outset, and all the people that were on the working group were absolutely fantastic, from staff from all over the council, union representatives, and people who work in violence against women and girls as well. So that was fantastic, and it was a pleasure, Dawn, last week as well with my other hat on. I am joint chair of the Equally Safe board, so I got to go along and give the awards out as well. So that was really, really good. But just total congratulations to you, Dawn, and everybody that was involved in that great piece of work. And I'm sure you'll continue to progress through it as well.
Very good. We seem to be picking up a large number of gongs. Last year we had a gold award for our work with Army veterans, and I'm just wanting to ask Grace, is there a central register of all these positive awards that Midlothian receive, and our public relations group well aware of them?
Yeah, we absolutely keep a collection of all of the awards, Provost, and when we would like to frame them as well. So the 2 awards that I spoke about earlier, we're formally presented with those virtually tomorrow, but we absolutely do keep a log of all the awards received.
Splendid. Thank you very much. And I take it that we all note, confirm and record in that matter. We now move on to 8.9, the Local Code of Corporate Governance. This is Jill Stacey's department, but I think, Grace, you were going to talk to this.
Yes, thank you, Provost. So following the discussion of this report at the last Audit Committee, I now present the updated Midlothian Council Local Code of Corporate Governance for approval. This code will assist with the 2021 annual assurance process following its scrutiny and endorsement by the Audit Committee. The Council's Local Code of Corporate Governance, which is consistent with the principles and recommendations of the SIPFA framework, delivering good governance in local government, and the supporting guidance notes for Scottish authorities dated 2016, was approved by this Council in December 2017. The local code has now been updated as part of the internal audit's assessment of internal control and governance, and through engagement with the corporate management team. The updated Local Code of Corporate Governance, as shown in Appendix 1, has been recommended by the Audit Committee for approval to ensure this key document continues to be relevant and complete to reflect the appropriate framework for effective governance of the Council's affairs and facilitate the exercise of its functions to deliver best value. As a result, Council today is invited to note the changes outlined in the report, approve the updated Local Code of Corporate Governance, and note the updated Local Code will be used for 2021 annual assurance process.
Thank you very much. It's a very thorough job by Jill Stacey, as usual. Any comments?
One moment, Peter, it's Councillor Johnston. I don't know if I'm having bad IT issues or not, but everyone's face has disappeared and I've just got a blank screen, but I can hear people. Is there some issues to be resolved?
Ask Democratic Services what they're seeing. I have had a reduction in faces, but everyone appears still to be able to hear.
Yeah, it appears to be that the videos, a lot of videos have gone, Provost, but we can still hear what's going on in the meeting.
Understanding of the standing orders and the protocol is we can continue if we are able to hear. Is that correct?
As long as you can continue to take part, all the elected members are still recorded as being present at the meeting.
And we've no sign that anybody has been completely cut off?
No.
The participant list appears still to be full. Thank you. Having tested that, have we any further comments on that paper, Local Code of Corporate Governance? We therefore note and approve the updated code. Thank you all very much. 8.10 on page 247 of 267, you will be glad to know the intake figures and limits for primary and secondary schools. Going to ask Fiona Robertson to talk to this. Fiona.
Good afternoon, Provost and councillors. The purpose of the report is to provide council with an update on the enrolment of pupils in the intake for school session 21-22. The council is being asked to note the estimated intake figures for primary secondary schools as set out in section 3 of the report, and also the requirement to apply intake limits at a number of schools in order to safeguard places for pupils to be able to attend their catchment school. Council will be aware that a report is normally brought before members in November, December, but we were aware of a proposed change in the appeals process, and in February this year the Scottish Government passed revised legislation updating placing request appeal timescales. So section 3 sets out the statutory duties that are placed on the local authority in the consideration of intake and placing requests, and the process followed to manage pupil intake and placing requests. And in particular, paragraph 3.5 sets out the key factors that are considered when determining the appropriate number of reserved spaces that are likely to be required for pupils moving into the catchment area. The schools where the number of P1 pupils residing in their catchment exceeds P1 intake capacity, and schools which are oversubscribed are Kings Park, St David's, Newton Grange, Moorfoot and Roslin primary schools. And the table on page 249 of your documentation show the estimated P1 intake, assuming all current placing requests and deferrals are granted. The estimated intake this year is up 3% for primary schools and 7% for secondary schools compared with 2021. So the P1 intake at St David's Primary School will be managed by prioritising those children who are baptised Roman Catholic, and we will maximise the P1 intake numbers that Kings Park and Woodburn can manage until additional capacity comes on stream. We will also manage the intake pressures in other schools such as Newton Grange and Moorfoot primaries, being mindful of developments within these areas, and also we will have the new East Houses Primary School coming on stream as well. In terms of our secondary school S1 intake, pressure on the capacity of Lastwade High School can continue to be met at Beeslack Community High School, and only Newbattle has an estimated S1 intake which is above the intake limit, and this will be managed through careful planning with the school senior management. This increase is mainly due to a reduction in the number of outwith placing requests, and we have a 13% increase in the catchment numbers for Newbattle Community High School. Overall, pupil enrolments for the 6 secondary schools will be managed by use of intake limits, proactive management of placing requests, and early engagement with parents and schools on the optimal placement of S1 pupils. In summary, as the national closing date for placing requests has just passed, we will still require to assess regularly and effectively manage pupil placement across our schools moving forward. Council may wish to note that we are due to provide an update on the learning estate, school capacity and our plans to manage these at a future cross-party group meeting as per their request. Thank you and happy to take
Thank you very much. This is obviously a report to be noted, and no parents or children are affected by it, but it just analyses the situation. Councillor Muirhead.
Yes, Provost, thanks. Yeah, I mean, this is something that we have to deal with on an annual basis, and you know, for a number of years we've had a growing population. I think that really important paper that came to the last council meeting on our capital programme, and we agreed to bring forward as much as we could a lot of our capital programme as possible to play a part in the economic recovery for the once this pandemic's over. A big part of that was about our school, our learning estate, the implementation of the learning estate strategy, and the plans for new build schools, refurbishing and extending existing ones. I think this paper really underlines that bringing these projects forward as quickly as we can is vital. It's obvious that pressures are building at Newbattle High School, and in some respects, to some extent, a victim of its own success, because it's been really transformational, the work that's been getting done at Newbattle over the past period. Now that will obviously is something that will eventually be alleviated by the building of a new high school in Gore Bridge. The building of a new high school on the A701 corridor will reduce the pressures, will help to reduce the pressures that are building up at Laswade at the moment, although it's not quite at that same level as New Battle, but we're getting there. Obviously, the extension to Kings Park that's being proposed, the new schools, East Houses, etc., will help to alleviate pressure in other areas. In the meantime, though, we've got to manage the demand, as Fiona says, for pupil places in each of the schools, and that's basically what this paper asks us to move, that we agree to note the figures that have been provided and to apply the intake limits that are being proposed where required to make sure that there is sufficient space within the schools for the pupils to attend in their own catchment areas, and capacity for the possibility of some additional children moving into the catchment areas. So I'll move the recommendations, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Muirhead. Obviously, Moorfoot, which both of us know very well, is a case in point. Are there further contributions? There we go. I think we're just about there, and thank you for that contribution, Fiona and Councillor Muirhead. That being the case, we have reached the end of the meeting within 2 hours, but Councillor Parry, I think, might just take us over the 2 hour limit. Councillor Parry.
Sorry, probably still got 10 minutes to go. I don't normally talk that much. What are you trying to insinuate? No, I just wanted to ask, since it was mentioned briefly, and Jim did mention the new school at Corbridge there, I wanted to ask about if there had been any progress in terms of the A701 school. I was a bit surprised to see a Midlothian Labour leaflet floating around Mayfield the other day saying that Labour had built a high school at Roslin. I'll not discuss the merits of that here, but I think we all know that that's not true, and that my understanding is that it will probably be further up than Roslin. But Fiona, I just wondered if you had any further indications of timescales. I know the Midlothian West councillors have been pressed for such information at Community Council lately, and you know, any further information you could give us would be helpful.
Yep. Thank you, Councillor Parry. Just to say that we are still in discussions with the University of Edinburgh over a preferred site. We are continuing our discussions in terms of the actual building itself, in terms of the design, and we're progressing that at this point in time. We have an A701 strategic project group with subgroups that involve staff from not just the BSLAC community, but across all of our secondary schools, because clearly our vision is that whatever, as you know, it's going to be a centre of excellence for STEM. It's not just to the benefit of the children who will attend the school, but also to the benefit of our young people across all our secondary schools. So again, we've got these strategic groups in place and working closely with the University of Edinburgh. And as I say, we're still in discussions around our preferred site, and looking at obviously the difference in terms of where what these locations might mean in terms of safe routes to the school, and also in terms of the closeness to the University of Edinburgh, because clearly want to work in partnership with them in relation to the STEM agenda.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that useful update, and ordinarily we'd be able to wave each other goodbye, but I think for technical reasons all I can do is wish you all a happy Easter and look forward to the next council meeting, and thank you all for your contribution.
Councillor Smale, I've got my hand up.
Oh, it's not showing on the system. I apologise. Yes, it is now showing the system.
Thank you. I just wondered, you know, sometimes when we've built these brand new schools, we find that within a year or two they're oversubscribed, there's too many bairns for one reason or another. But can architects design schools in such a way that it is easily to extend and build on classrooms, or to make the school bigger in some way to accommodate the growth in our population?
Yes, it's a modular concept. Fiona, matching the scale of the school to the numbers of children, that may fluctuate. What's the latest thinking? You're on mute.
apologies. In terms of the designs that we've been developing recently, they're built in such a way that we can add other blocks onto the school, so we can extend them. So that now is part of any of the designs. So for example, you know, if we were looking at Bilston Primary School, we would know where exactly we could expand the school. So that's always factored in if there may be a requirement in the future to expand due to either new housing developments and increase in the population.
And that's catered for in the PPP contract, so we don't have to dislodge everything. Thank you. On that note, at last, thank you all. We're still within 2 hours. Gone. Any more contributors? So again, thank you all very much for coming today, and I look forward to seeing you at the next council meeting.